So yeah, Sand Mountain Society, just a little background on our organization quickly at the beginning. Formed in 1989. This is our president here in his younger days on his first project. The group, the organization, 501c3 nonprofit, volunteer-based, pretty much out of Portland, is named after this lookout you see here, Sand Mountain Lookout, which is a reconstruction of one that was burned by the Forest Service. So Sand Mountain took another lookout from another forest and used it essentially as the basis for reconstructing the original lookout that was at Sand Mountain. So that's where the name comes from. We're involved in a whole bunch of projects. We're constantly juggling multiple projects at the same time. These are some of our major projects. We've done a restoration, full restoration on 12 lookouts on 5 different national forests, worked on a little Park Service, little state projects as well. In addition to doing fire lookout restoration, we also do building salvage that helps support restoration efforts with the lookouts, and maintenance and staffing of Sand Mountain lookouts, another part of what we do. So I want to talk about one of our current projects is a place called High Rock Lookout. It's just outside Mount Rainier National Park in the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest. And the lookout was built in 1931, abandoned by the Forest Service in 2004, and has deteriorated since that time. So this is what it looked like in 2020. You see the iconic view. It is one of the most visited lookouts in the Pacific Northwest. No question about it, in part because of its proximity to Seattle and Tacoma. It is an L4. We've been seeing pictures of L4s in many of these presentations already. It's one of 7 or 8 surviving Grange Hall style L4s that has the gable roof as opposed to a hip type roof, the first generation of these L4s. Here are some of the others. You can see Mount Baker Snoqualmie has 3 of them, and the rest are in Oregon. We seem to be losing these on a regular basis, as I'll talk about a little bit later in the presentation. So as Leif was talking about, assessments, doing a condition assessment, a good way to start one of these projects. I went out with an engineer when I was still working for the Forest Service, 2013. We did a condition assessment on this and started to see some major structural issues, also a little bit of vandalism as it had been abandoned. People were going out and slapping paint on it every few years, but not much more beyond that. And it turns out there were some more integrity issues to the foundation structure that caused the local historical society in the town of Packwood, Washington, to take a real interest in this project. And they started hammering on the Forest Service, you need to do something about the lookout. It gets visited so much, you really need to do something to preserve this important and iconic historic site. So we formed a collaborative working group. It was Forest Service, Sand Mountain Society, and the local historical society. Formed a group. We started meeting to talk about how we could restore the lookout. And the museum folks, the historical society folks, took it upon themselves to set up a PayPal account and start taking donations. And so they raised over $50,000 that we could apply to our work on the project. So the first thing we did after the condition assessment was an historic property management plan. And I want to just mention this. This will kind of my theme for this talk is process and planning. And in 1983, the Forest Service issued direction out of the Washington office that Heritage Program people, it wasn't called Heritage Program, it was a Cultural Resources Program then, would write a historic property management plan for every National Register eligible or listed property in the National Forest. And this was the first one that had ever been written on the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest. And this was, more than 20 years later. And it's still the only one that's ever been written. So it was an unfunded mandate on the part of the federal agency. And there are a lot of those,
Did you write that then?
We wrote this in 2020.
You did?
Yeah.
Cool.
And this was a great exercise. Historic property plan basically lays out what's your future intention for this particular historic structure, and how are we going to get to that stage. So here's the elements of the historic property plan. You have your basic descriptive information, detailed architectural history of the building, contextual history of how does it fit into, you know, land management on that, in that time period, the 1930s. And, you know, what was the system like that it was a part of? You know, what were the other lookouts in the area? How was it connected? What was the trail system at the time? You put all that historic stuff in there. Then we actually do the National Register evaluation following the criteria that are published in you know, federal guidelines. And then we look at management standards and guidelines. So that would be every forest has a management plan, a land management plan. So what does the land management plan say about historic structures and how they should be preserved? So you cite all your authorities, the legal authorities, you go through, you know, National Register criteria, et cetera. You look at what the intent is for historic buildings, and you know, if it's in wilderness, you're going to be looking at a lot of different criteria than if it's outside of wilderness. That's going to affect a lot of your outcome of managing a structure in wilderness versus one that's outside. And with this project, we're outside of wilderness, so that means we can use power tools and generators and all of that in our work. Then I want to talk about the Secretary of the Interior standards, because one of the major things that our organization, Sand Mountain Society, has tried to do is adhere to the Secretary of the Interior standards for historic preservation and really follow them as closely as we can. And that's all about keeping as much of the integrity, the original integrity of the building as you can, so it embodies that time period and isn't modified by too many later changes and additions. And then the plan includes the restoration plan, where we lay out, here's how we're going to do the restoration. And then the long-term management is, what are you going to do with it? You're going to put it in the rental program? Are you going to staff it with volunteers? Are you going to put a Forest Service person in? That's what the long-term management part is. And how are you going to maintain it over time? And who's going to be responsible for that? So these are all the elements of an historic property plan. Here's what the publication looks like. This has gone through multiple iterations since the Park Service first issued this document, but this is supposed to be the guidelines that federal agencies follow for maintaining their historic buildings. So we keep this kind of in our back pocket all the time. So with this lookout, one of the things, the big things we learned as we started opening the walls up, is that there was some serious structural deterioration in the support structure, the weight-bearing elements, and sagging that was starting was, you know, causing problems with the shutters and things like that. So we made the decision, looking at that we were going to have to disassemble the entire lookout to do the restoration. We were going to have to take it down to its bones, literally. And we started with the windows. We had planned to do the whole restoration in 2020 and 2021, but COVID got in the way. So during the COVID year, the Forest Service gave us permission to have a limited number of people gathering in one spot close together and do just a small task. And that was to take all the windows out. How many windows are in an L4? There's a trivia question for you. Give out some prizes for that. So we took all the windows out, sandwiched them in masonite, and packed them out on our backs to the trailhead. And it's only 1.6 miles. So unlike some of the others we've seen that are, you know, take you a whole day to get into, this one's a little more manageable that way. So we took the windows out for restoration, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then we returned in 2021 with some support, initial support for getting water and tools and things in with a pack string from another volunteer. And then we began the process of disassembling the lookout from the top down. And here are some of our members up there Oh, by the way, this reminds me, if anyone's interested, we are doing a fall arrest training, roof work training session put on in part by HistoriCorps. If you've heard of HistoriCorps, that's 2 weeks from now down in Southern Oregon. If anybody's interested and doesn't have a fear of heights, you're welcome to come to that training and certification program. So ask me later. Anyways, more disassembly. Here you can see taking everything down to the basic platform. And we made some interesting archaeological discoveries. I call this architectural archaeology. As many of you know, the Aladdin Company sold kits of these lookouts. And this was a kit manufactured in Portland by the Aladdin Company. And as we opened things up, we started seeing that many of these parts were stenciled with numbers. And we contacted Ray Kresick up in Spokane and asked if he had a materials list that would correspond with these numbers. And he said he did not. So if anybody is aware of a materials list like that, it would be nice to have that as part of the historic record here. But what you see is this was addressed and shipped to the local district ranger, and this was stenciled right on some of the lumber packages. We had crowd control issues as we were doing the dismantling. There was no closure on the trail. We had some days 50 people on site while we're trying to do work. We had people stepping over us while we're using, skill saws, hand tools. It was a real crazy scene, as you can see in this picture. But we ultimately got everything bundled up, weighed to fit into certain size cargo nets like this. And we hired a helicopter. The museum funding paid for this, which was pretty expensive, and flew the lumber off the peak, which you can see in the background here. That's High Rock there. So they had a straight shot, 1 mile, just straight down from the summit to the trailhead. And we put these packages right into the back of Forest Service trucks. It was really slick. So back to the Secretary's standards. Now that we've removed the whole cab in pieces and in bundles, we took it all to a Forest Service shop at the local ranger station. They gave us a big space in their warehouse. And we started looking at what we needed to do to restore the materials so that we could put the lookout back together. So we have spent the last several years working on the preparation of all the material to go back up there this summer. In July, we'll be back up there. So taking a look at the Secretary's standards, here's some examples. I want to give you some examples of some of the standards and how we follow them. This one talks about repairing versus replacing. So if you have something that's been abused, and many of these older things have been subject to weathering, they've been subject to vandalism, they've been deterioration of one sort or another, you really have to take a look at it and make that judgment call. Is this usable or is this too far gone? And we try to keep everything we can. That's kind of our rule of operation. So here's an example. The windows all went to Vintage Windows, LLC, Albany, Oregon. Chris Gustafson here, the owner, he's an expert in windows. And you can see vandalism, they kicked out one of the muntins on that window. So he had to manufacture something that would match the same profile and fit in there. And here's an example of one of the pieces that they did restore. You had the bottom piece had rotted out completely, had been broken. He was able to mill and replace that, which isn't easy because you got pins where these things are joined together. So that's an example of retaining original material that has been damaged. Another example, this is ceiling material, beadboard ceiling material that had cracked, and we glue and repair that kind of stuff. The other thing is what they call in-kind replacement. So if you have something that does need to be replaced completely, you don't just go down to Home Depot and buy something off the shelf. You try and find something that's of the same vintage, because often the dimensions are a little off, dimensions are a little different. So in finding in-kind materials, we've ended up doing salvage projects, also for the Forest Service. Forest Service was really good about wanting to get rid of buildings, it seems. And here was a garage. The garage had been covered. Pay no attention to the outside. That's T111. Inside, and we wouldn't deal with T111 unless it was on the 1959 vintage lookouts, right? But here, what we did was salvage shiplap material, 1x8 shiplap material, lots of it. So we set up a crew denailing all this lumber, and some of, well, another example of in-kind stuff is going to paint colors. This is an example of a document. This is a document prepared by the National Park Service, kind of as a follow-up to the Secretary's standards, that gives you much more detailed direction on specific things. There are chapters on masonry, chapters on stonework, chapters on brickwork, and a chapter on paint, proper methods of dealing with paint, stripping paint, what different kinds of strippers will do to the wood. Sometimes that's not so good. So we ended up, again, using the funding from the museum to take this to a commercial stripper so that we would remove the lead paint. We'd been told by the Forest Service at one point that we couldn't expose volunteers to any lead-based paint. So this was a great solution. These folks were certified with the federal government, so we could take our flooring, in this case, flooring that still had paint on it. They would strip it all off, and then we could start fresh with the wood. One of the things that those Park Service directions tell you is to, when you're doing a restoration to a certain time period, is, you know, look at your paint colors. This lookout had been painted white over and over again for a couple of decades. And we knew, and again, this is archaeology, underneath the white, we found gray paint, which was pretty standard in the region for virtually all Depression era buildings, whether it be at a ranger station or up on top of a mountain. So this is an example of the recycled shiplap material being converted into a new shutter for the lookout. This lookout still had plywood shutters on it, you know, not to period at all. So we went back to the original plans. This shutter is based on the original plans, and the color scheme is back to the original color scheme. So by building these in the shop over the winter, getting them ready, that means, of course, we can't carry this shutter on our backs back up there. So it's got to be a helicopter return. So we have all these shutters down at the ranger station now. Those will be flown up to the top of the mountain. Another example of recycling and reusing material. Take advantage of a situation. Leif was talking about fires that he experienced. We had the same thing with Bull of the Woods Lookout, one of our projects. We had planned to restore this lookout, had an arrangement with the Forest Service to do that, had bundles of shingles already stashed in the lookout for a new roof. And then fire came in 2021, burned it down, and this is what was left. So we sent a crew up to salvage what we could, and we got all kinds of material. We got lots of copper wire. All the copper wire had been removed from High Rock Lookout by vandals some years back. So we now have enough wire to reset the lightning protection system on the lookout. And so, again, another example of in-kind use of as much original material as we can, period material. We would not be able to do this project if it were not for the volunteers that work with Sand Mountain Society. And we decided our group was getting to be older and older, and we wanted to get some more younger interest in lookout restoration into the group. So we started training programs 3 years ago. 3-day training program. It's a full day of classroom, first day, and then 2 days of shop training. And here's one of our more recent classes from last year. And we have used these workshops, training workshops, to prepare all the materials to go back up to the mountain and do as much of it offsite as we can to save time during the summer, this coming summer, when we're putting it back together. It's much easier to do it in a shop down at low elevation than on top of a mountain where when the wind's blowing. I mean, you all know that it can be tough working on weather conditions in the mountains. So good. I'm almost done here. Let me just wrap this up by saying one of the other changes we've noticed, Sand Mountain Society has been working with the Forest Service, like I said, since 1989. For a long time, all we needed to do was sign a one-page volunteer agreement with the local ranger station. And you can see the description isn't too extensive there. High Rock Lookout Restoration. Well, that's all changed. Now there's a trend in Region 6 anyways, of wanting us to do challenge cost share agreements, a little more elaborate process. And challenge cost share agreement is something that we now have 3 of, one with the Deschutes National Forest, one with the Rogue River Siskiyou, and now one with the Gifford Pinchot National Forest. It's not quite signed yet. And the Willamette National Forest. So this is the trend now, is to go with a little more complicated process. And here's the patience part of that, all right? So we were asked to do this challenge cost share agreement 2 years ago. We finally got around to writing an operational plan. The operational plan is a detailed plan, much like what's in the historic property plan, only with way more detail. And Forest Service said that to send in a challenge cost share agreement, and we're not getting any money from them at all. But this is a vehicle where if you could get a grant or funding from the Forest Service, it would be a way for them to provide that and you provide in-kind services. Anyways, take a look at this. We submitted our plan in March of 2024. March of 2025, you want to guess what happened? You followed the news?
Oh, yeah.
All grants and agreements are frozen in the Forest Service nationwide right now, from the Washington office on down. What used to be signed off on and approved by the local district ranger now has to go to the Washington office for approval. That's the new rule.
Wow.
So we have no idea whether our project is going to get approved. We submitted, after doing multiple revisions, after doing an operational risk assessment plan, a financial plan, a mission aviation safety plan, because we're using a helicopter, all of that went in over all these months. We send all that in February, and guess what happened the last week of February? They shut all of it down. So I originally had a picture of the White House here, but my wife's made me remove it. That's the Washington office of the Forest Service. And this was our reaction. You know. Right. What would Smokey Bear say, huh? Thank you. All right. So in the meantime, we've been getting a lot of great support from the local communities. The newspapers in the local area have been just fascinated with the story and reporting on it. We just set up a Facebook page. I'm old school. I don't do any social media, but we have people in our organization now that said we need to do social media. So we now have a Facebook page that you can find pretty easily. And last thing, our goal is to have a finished product that looks like the photo you see here from 1940, the 1930s era. So thanks a lot for listening, and glad to talk to anybody later the rest of the day.